I'll never forget the sound the room made when they thought they had finally erased me. It was a warm Sunday afternoon in late June, the kind that makes the air feel heavy enough to bend your spine. My parents had invited nearly 30 relatives to their house in Willow Bend, a place where the lawns always look professionally manicured, and everyone whispers behind picture-perfect smiles. They said it was a family discussion about the estate, but everyone knew what that really meant, choosing who would be crowned the favorite once and for all. I walked in expecting tension. What I didn't expect was applause. My older sister, Brielle, the golden child, the girl whose mistakes had always been repackaged as learning experiences, stood at the center of the living room holding a champagne flute. Her fiancé, Jonah, hovered behind her like a proud bodyguard. Dad sat with his arm around Mom, both wearing matching grins that didn't reach their eyes. When Brielle tapped her glass, the room hushed like she was royalty. Everyone, she announced, Mom and Dad have decided that the lakeside cabins, the farmland, and the old Prescott house will all be transferred to me. They want to keep things simple and unified. Then she looked straight at me, and that means my Lisa will step aside voluntarily. Cheers erupted. Actual cheers. My aunt clapped like she was at a Broadway show. My cousins whistled. Someone even shouted. About time. I stood completely still. The world didn't tilt, didn't spin, didn't collapse under me, the way they must have expected. I didn't even blink. I simply watched the celebration of my supposed erasure and let the noise wash over me like static. Only once the applause died down did I lift my eyes toward my parents. Are you sure, I asked, my voice calm enough to make 3 people flinch? You haven't forgotten something. Dad's fork froze halfway to his mouth. Mom's smile cracked. Brielle's triumph flickered, then steadied. She always believed she could outsmile the truth. But the room grew so quiet I could hear the grandfather clock ticking behind me. Every person there, family, friends, even Jonah felt it. They felt what I already knew. The script they had rehearsed for months was about to fall apart. I didn't say another word, not yet, not until they earned it. Because before I could reveal what they had conveniently erased, I needed them, every single one of them, to feel the full weight of their arrogance, and they did. You could almost see the confidence dripping off them like melted wax. I wish I could tell you their reaction surprised me, but I grew up in this house. I grew up knowing exactly how far they would go to maintain their own version of order. And in their version of order, my place was always somewhere beneath Brielle's shadow. Funny thing is, I didn't mind shadows. Shadows are where people underestimate you. Shadows are where plans grow quietly without interruption. Shadows are where you learn to stop expecting fairness and start preparing for the moment. The table finally turns, but before I tell you what they forgot, what they never imagined could exist, I need to tell you who I was before that Sunday, because no revenge is complete unless you understand the version of yourself that had to die before the final strike could land. My name is Melissa Rowan, and until that afternoon, my family believed I existed solely to make their lives easier. I was the daughter who moved away without drama, the daughter who never asked for help, the daughter who worked 2 jobs in college while Brielle's tuition was paid in full before she even chose a major. The daughter who was thanked for her independence when what they meant was convenient distance. They never asked why I stopped coming home for Thanksgiving. They never noticed when I switched careers. They didn't even ask where I lived now, though I'd been in Ashford Ridge for nearly 6 years. And still, somehow, they expected me to show up today and smile while they handed every piece of our grandmother's legacy to Brielle, grandmother Eleanor. The only person who ever looked at me and saw something sharp, something steady, something capable, had been gone for 14 months. And the truth was this: my parents never controlled her estate. They only believed they did. So when they stood there expecting gratitude from me, expecting compliance, expecting my silence, all I could think was, you're about to learn how expensive your assumptions really are. Most people talk about their grandmothers like warm quilts and sugar cookies. Mine, Eleanor. Rowan was more like iron wrapped in velvet. Soft when she chose, but unbreakable where it counted. She called me 2 years before she died. Just one sentence. I need you here this weekend. No explanation. No small talk. That was her way. and it was enough for me to pack a bag and drive 5 hours to Redwood Lake, the quiet area where she'd lived since before I was born. She was waiting on her porch when I arrived, cane in one hand, 2 folders in the other. "We don't have time for pleasantries," she said. "Sit." Inside the first folder were rental logs from the lakeside cabins, 6 of them each fully booked most months, and profit sheets from the farmland. I recognized Brielle's handwriting immediately, neat loops and cheerful circles over her eyes. Except the numbers weren't cheerful. They were wrong. Not a mistake. Wrong, a deliberate wrong income, missing expenses, inflated maintenance fees that didn't correspond to any work order. Over the previous 18 months, more than $300,000 had simply evaporated into categories Brielle controlled. I looked up at my grandmother, anger already burning my throat. "Why didn't you confront her?" Eleanor leaned back slowly, eyes sharp. "Because your parents will defend her. Because Brielle will cry. Because I do not battle children who believe they're bulletproof." Then she slid the second folder to me, a living trust. Her signature. A schedule of assets listing every cabin, every acre of farmland, and the Prescott house. And next to successor trustee and beneficiary in her firm cursive, Melissa Rowan. My breath caught, "Grandma. Why me?" "Because you see things clearly," she said. "And because you don't confuse loudness for leadership. A trait most of this family lacks." She tapped the trust with her cane. "These will transfer to you immediately upon my passing. Quietly, without your parents' approval, without probate, without Brielle's performance." My heart pounded. "They'll explode when they find out." "Yes," she said. "Which is why they won't find out. Not until someone tries to take what is already yours. That is when you show them the truth." We spent the entire weekend reviewing every document. She walked me through the deed transfers already recorded with the county under her name, but tied to the trust. She had prepared every step with surgical precision. On Monday, the notary arrived. Eleanor's hand did not shake. Mine barely moved at all. When it was done, she poured a thin glass of bourbon, her only vice, and handed me the same promise she had likely carried her whole life. "Paper beats entitlement," she whispered. "Every time." I held that promise. I folded it into myself like steel. 14 months later, she was gone. And my family, blissfully ignorant, believed they controlled everything she left behind. They believed it so deeply that they didn't hesitate to plan their own celebration of Brielle's inheritance. They didn't even notice I stopped attending holiday dinners. They didn't call when I moved out of state. They never once asked why Eleanor had left her home office locked for the last year of her life. They assumed her world, like mine, revolved around Brielle. But the truth was simpler. Eleanor had not trusted them with her legacy. She trusted me. And promises like that do not fade. If Chapter 1 was the applause, Chapter 3 was the ambush. 2 weeks before the celebration at their home, my mother called me out of nowhere. Her voice carried that practiced softness she reserved for moments when she wanted something. "We need you here this Sunday, sweetheart. Just to clear up paperwork. Nothing dramatic." Paperwork. A word families weaponize when they don't want you to ask questions. I arrived at their house to find the dining table set up like a corporate negotiation. Legal pads, printed documents, pens waiting in a perfect line. Dad sat at the head, Brielle smiling beside him like a woman about to collect a prize she didn't earn. Mom slid a sheet toward me, just a simple waiver. "It acknowledges you're not seeking any share of the cabins or farmland, since you live out of state and Brielle is taking over. It's much easier this way." I read the title, Waiver of Inheritance Interest. I didn't flinch. Dad cleared his throat. "It keeps lawyers out of it. Family should handle things privately." Brielle chimed in lightly, painfully sweet. "We're trying to spare you the stress, my Lisa. You've got your own life now. This is the grown-up solution." There it was. The tone. The one she used when she wanted me to feel small enough to disappear into the carpet. I slid the paper back across the table. "I'm not signing." Silence. Thick, heavy, cold. Dad leaned forward. "Let's avoid theatrics. You sign. We move on. Move on to what I asked. A future everyone else decided on." Mom clutched her pearls. "Not metaphorically, literally. We don't want arguments. Your grandmother wanted peace." My voice did not rise. She wanted fairness. If she valued peace above fairness, she wouldn't have kept her office locked from you. That landed like a slap. Dad's face tightened. "My Lisa, this isn't about choosing favorites." I almost laughed. "It has always been about choosing favorites." Brielle's smile vanished. "You're being dramatic. And you're being predictable." I stood and picked up my bag. Dad's voice rose, echoing off the walls. If you walk out right now, you're choosing conflict over family. No, I said softly, I'm choosing myself. As I reached for the door, Brielle called after me, you're going to regret this. But she was wrong. The only regret in that room was theirs. They just didn't know it yet. I drove home that night with a calm that felt like armor. The waiver had confirmed something I already feared. They were willing to rewrite history as long as it gave Brielle center stage. But they had forgotten something crucial. History written on paper cannot be rewritten by applause. By the time I arrived for their grand celebration, Willow Bend had transformed into a stage set for their fantasy. White tents, caterers with trays of citrus cocktails, guests drifting around with brochures for Brielle's lakeside legacy. They had printed her name on glossy paper. Glossy paper. Mom spotted me first, rushing forward in heels. She could barely walk in. She hugged me so tightly I felt the desperation in her ribs. We're so glad you came, she said. Dad shook my hand like he was greeting a visiting investor, not a daughter. Then Brielle emerged from the porch, wearing a sundress the color of champagne. Jonah beside her like a decorative accessory. She lifted her glass in my direction. I'm shocked you made it, she said. You shouldn't be, I replied. People tend to show up when they're invited to their own funeral. Confusion flickered across her face, but it disappeared quickly. She had a crowd to charm. Inside the living room, they had set up a giant map of the properties. Red circles, bullet points, income projections, a literal vision board of a future that did not belong to them. I wheeled my small black suitcase heavy with documents right into the center of the room. Several heads turned. Traveling somewhere, Jonah joked. No, I said, arriving. Soon everyone gathered as Brielle began her speech. Thank you all for being here to celebrate the continuation of Grandma Eleanor's legacy. As of today, all properties will be placed under my management. Clapping cheers toasts. Her smile widened bright enough to blind. I waited for silence. I waited for the universe to inhale. Then I opened the suitcase. The sound of the metal latches snapping through the room was sharp enough to cut the air in half. 8 deeds. A trust packet thick as a legal textbook. All placed on the coffee table in a neat, deliberate line. Dad's voice cracked. My Lisa, what are you doing? Returning the truth to the room, I said. A hush fell. Even the caterers froze in the doorway. Grandma Eleanor's embossed seals glimmered under the chandelier. Dates, stamps, signatures. Brielle took one step forward, stopped and stared. What is this? My inheritance, I said. The real one. For the first time in her life, Brielle didn't know what to say. She looked at the documents like they were riddles written in fire. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Dad grabbed one of the deeds with shaking fingers. These can't be real. They're recorded, I answered, every one of them. Mom's knees buckled, and she sank into a chair. Why? Why would she do this? I met her eyes steady because she saw what you refused to. The family attorney, Mr. Keller, examined the trust. His face drained as he read the clauses. This overrides any distribution your parents planned, he said. Legally, it's airtight. A ripple of shock tore across the room. Jonah whispered, Bree. She left everything to Maelisa. Brielle's face twisted into something raw, something unfamiliar. She manipulated Grandma, she spat. You know how confused Eleanor was near the end. Mr. Keller shook his head. The dates are clear. She was fully competent at the time of signing. Someone dropped a champagne flute. It shattered across the hardwood. I did not move. Dad stepped closer, his voice cracking. We can fix this. We can redistribute. All you have to do is... Sign away what's legally mine, I interrupted again. His mouth snapped shut. A murmur swept the crowd. A shift subtle but unmistakable. They were no longer celebrating Brielle. They were watching her unravel. Then a voice rose from the back of the room. It was my cousin Harper. Wait, if Grandma trusted my Lisa with everything, what does that say about Brielle? That was the moment the atmosphere changed completely. Brielle's mask shattered. Tears threatened, rage sharpened her features. You planned this, she hissed at me. You waited until the perfect moment to humiliate me. No, I said, I waited until the moment you tried to steal what was already mine. Mom sobbed into her hands. Dad sank into a chair like his bones had collapsed. Guests exchanged looks uncomfortable enough to sting. Then suddenly Brielle lunged. Jonah caught her by the waist before she reached me, pulling her back as she screamed words that didn't sound like language anymore. The room stared in stunned silence. And that was when I felt it. Not triumph, not revenge, clarity. The moment you realize you no longer need anyone in a room that once defined you, that moment is liberation. I closed the suitcase, stood tall, and said, I'm done being the quiet one. The room did not clap this time. They simply watched me walk out, and behind me the world they had built for Brielle collapsed inward like a dying star. The funny thing about dramatic exits is that the world does not actually stop when you walk out the door. I drove back to Ashford Ridge that night with my hand steady on the wheel. The trust documents back in the suitcase beside me. The highway hummed under the tires. Streetlights flashed over the windshield like slow camera shutters. I expected to feel shaky or guilty, or maybe even triumphant. Instead, I felt empty. Not hollow in a tragic way. More like a house that had finally been cleared of old furniture, bare echoing, ready for something new. My phone started buzzing before I even reached the county line. First came the family group text. Brielle, you humiliated us, Mom. Please do not respond until everyone has calmed down, Dad. We need to talk like adults. Call me? I muted the thread. Then came the voicemails one after another. My mother crying, my father angry, Jonah trying to sound reasonable as he suggested I reconsider holding the properties, as if they were party favors I had grabbed by mistake. I let every call go to voicemail until the notifications filled an entire screen. Then another. Eventually, I turned the phone off and drove in blessed quiet. When I reached my apartment, I carried the fireproof lockbox to my bedroom closet. Every deed, every page of the living trust, every notarized signature, I laid them all out on the bed one more time. Grandma Eleanor's name, my name, the dates, the county stamps. This was not a secret anymore, this was my reality. A strange thought slid into my mind as I locked everything away. For the first time in my life, my family could not reduce me to a role. I was not the backup daughter, the substitute bridesmaid, the emergency babysitter, the one they called when they needed someone to house-sit the dogs over Christmas. I was the legal owner of a small empire they believed belonged to their favorite. Revenge did not feel like a dramatic movie scene. It felt like a very quiet shift in gravity. The next morning, I called Mr. Keller, the lawyer. I want everything transferred into a separate holding company. I told him, new bank accounts, new management agreements. I want the tenants protected. I want everything in my name, but with a firewall between me and my parents. He did not even sound surprised. Your grandmother anticipated this, he said. She started the paperwork for a family company years ago. She just never put anyone else on it. I will finalize it in your name. We spent an hour on the phone going over details. Insurance, property taxes, rental agreements. All the things my parents had left to Brielle while they focused on the theater of inheritance and will and family mythology. When I hung up, I sat at my kitchen table and stared at the sunlight on the floor. This was not just family drama anymore. This was a business, a responsibility. 30 or so families lived in those cabins and on that farmland. Their rents paid their own bills, kept their kids in the same schools, kept their lives stable. Eleanor had not left me toys. She had left me lives to protect. That realization hit harder than anything my parents had said. Later that evening, I turned my phone back on. New messages flooded in. Brielle, furious dad bargaining, mom begging. One voicemail stood out. It was shorter, quieter, from my cousin Harper. Hey, my Lisa, I just wanted to say, I saw the way they talked to you. I used to think favoritism was just how families worked, but today felt wrong. If you ever want to talk, I am here. I replayed that one twice. It struck me that in a family business built on manipulation and secrecy, even a small offer of honesty felt radical. I did not call Harper back, not yet. But I saved the message, because I had a feeling this was only the beginning of the tables turning. And when karma finally arrives, it rarely knocks only once. The first official consequence came in the mail 3 weeks after the so-called celebration. It did not arrive at my apartment. It went straight to my parents' house. Dad called me 6 times in a row before I answered. His voice shook. Not with anger this time, but with something closer to fear. The tax people are auditing us, he said. They want records on all the cabins and the farmland for the last several years. They say there are discrepancies. Of course there were discrepancies. I had seen the fake expenses, the missing rent, the nonsense numbers that Brielle had massaged until the income looked smaller and her lifestyle looked bigger. Talk to your accountant, I said evenly. We do not have the records, he whispered. Brielle kept everything. And they say the ownership trail leads to you now. There it was, the twist. Then they will need to talk to my lawyer, I replied. And they will see the dates. I am responsible for everything from the day the trust activated. Not for the years when Brielle was bleeding, the properties dry. Dad went silent. My Lisa, he said finally. They are talking about penalties, a judge, a lien on the house if we cannot pay. The house, the symbol, the big place in Willow Bend, with its manicured lawn and its neighbors who believed they were living beside a model family instead of a fragile story built on favoritism and denial. I did not gloat. I did not say this is karma or this is payback for the way you excluded me from every decision. I just told him the truth. You let her run the business like a private wallet. You ignored every warning sign because you believed she could do no wrong. This is not my doing, Dad. This is hers and yours. He tried to say something else, but his voice broke. He hung up. Harper texted me later that night. They got hit with a huge penalty, she wrote, the kind that takes years to crawl out from under. Over the next few months, the stories trickled in. The big house went on the market. The listing called it a charming lakeside property with room for extended family gatherings. It did not mention the shouting match that had shaken its walls the day I walked out. The boat sold first, the expensive cars next. Little pieces of the image they had curated for so long chipped away. Then came the news about Brielle and Jonah. The wedding had been scheduled for late autumn, a mansion venue, a string quartet, a guest list that read like a small city directory. But when Jonah found out his future wife had spent years falsifying income-draining family accounts and lying about it, something shifted in his polished, careful tone. He called off the wedding 2 months before the date. The official story was that he needed time to focus on his career. The whispered story, the one Harper passed on to me, was different. He told her, "I do not want to build a life on quicksand," Harper said. Then he mailed the ring back instead of facing her in person. For a long time, I sat with that image, the ring traveling alone in a padded envelope like a tiny verdict. Meanwhile, I hired a women-owned management company to handle the day-to-day issues with the cabins and farmland. They answered tenant calls within an hour. They fixed actual problems instead of inventing fake ones for write-offs. The vacancy rate dropped. Income became steady and predictable. Revenge was not just watching my sister lose what she thought was hers. Revenge was watching the properties actually serve the people who lived and worked there instead of feeding Brielle's ego. It was not about punishment anymore. It was about correction. And correction, when it finally arrives, can be the most powerful form of justice there is. Thanksgiving used to be a scripted production at the Rowan house. My parents insisted on one long table with Brielle at one end, me at the other. She carved the turkey, I refilled water glasses, she made toasts, I cleared plates. That was our silent choreography, the golden child and the reliable one. The first Thanksgiving after the trust reveal, there was no long table. There was barely a family. 2 weeks before the holiday, my mother called. Her voice sounded smaller than I remembered. "We are doing a simple dinner this year," she said. "Just us, maybe Harper and her parents. We would like you to come, Melissa. It will not be about the inheritance or the will or the business, just family." I pictured their new place, a modest townhouse on the edge of town. No lake view, no guest suite, no room to parade a favored daughter in front of a cheering audience. "Will Brielle be there?" I asked. "Yes," Mom said. "She is having a rough time. She misses you." That was the moment I realized my mother and I were living in different realities. "Mom," I said gently, "she never had me. You cannot miss what you never valued." My mother exhaled a shaky breath. "Your father has not been sleeping. He says we failed both our daughters. He wants to apologize." The word hung between us. Apologize. It was not a word my parents used often. I thought about the years of favoritism, the way they had turned every family conflict into a referendum on my ability to let things go, the countless small betrayals that had snowballed into one massive one. I believed they were sorry. I also believe they were grieving their lost comfort more than my lost trust. "I am not ready to sit at a table with everyone acting like nothing happened," I said. "I am happy to meet you and Dad somewhere neutral. A coffee shop, a park. But I will not walk back into a house where my pain is dessert after the pumpkin pie." She started to cry. Quiet, careful tears. "This is tearing us apart." "No," I said. "This is showing us what was already broken." We ended the call on a soft, unresolved note. On Thanksgiving Day, I roasted a small chicken in my apartment. I made mashed potatoes and green beans and an apple crisp, just for myself. I set one place at the table and lit a candle in an old brass holder that had belonged to Eleanor. As I ate, I spoke to her in my head. You were right, I told her paper beats promises, but honesty beats everything. After dinner, I took a drive out to the cabins. A few of the families had their lights on, silhouettes moving behind curtains, kids chasing each other through leaves, laughter drifting across the cold air. This was my inheritance, too. Not just land and buildings, but scenes like this. Stability, continuity. The opposite of the toxic family chaos I had grown up with. I sat in the car and watched until the cold seeped into my toes, then drove home feeling strangely full. I had not reclaimed my parents. I had not healed my relationship with my sister. The betrayal and the confrontation still sat between us like a heavy silent guest. But for the first time on a major holiday, I did not feel excluded. I had chosen my own table, and that in its own quiet way felt like the beginning of a new family tradition. The months that followed came in two layers. On the surface, my life in Ashford Ridge continued as usual. I worked my regular job 3 days a week, then drove out to the properties twice a month to walk the land, meet tenants, and review reports with the management company. It felt like running a small, steady company, rather than fighting a never-ending family drama. But underneath that practical rhythm, memories kept rising like old photographs floating to the top of a box. One afternoon, I stood in the doorway of cabin 3 while a tenant showed me the patch of wood flooring that needed repair. As she apologized for calling, I flashed back to being 8 years old, standing in our childhood kitchen, apologizing for asking for a birthday party. Brielle had already had her party earlier that year. A big backyard event with a rented bouncy house and a custom cake shaped like a ballet slipper. I had asked for something simple. A sleepover pizza. Maybe a movie. Dad had frowned at the calendar. "Money is tight right now," he said. "We just spent a lot on your sister's recital. You understand, right? You are the practical one." I had nodded, of course. Practical girls do not cry over skipped birthdays. But in the quiet of my room that night, I promised myself something. Someday I would celebrate my own milestones without asking permission. Now, decades later, I watched that tenant's kids chase each other across the small front yard, while their mother worried about being too much trouble for reporting a flooring issue. I heard myself say with surprising firmness, "You are not trouble. You are the reason this place exists. Let us fix it right." As I drove away, I realized that inheriting land from my grandmother had forced me to confront the same pattern in myself that had always existed in my family. I had been raised to believe that my needs were an inconvenience, that fairness was optional, that the loudest person at the table made the rules. But here at these cabins and on this farmland, I was the one writing the rules. And I could choose something different. I implemented small changes. A clearer process for maintenance requests, periodic surveys to check on tenant satisfaction, a holiday fund set aside to help any family who hit a rough patch in winter. Nothing dramatic, no grand announcements, just quiet, consistent respect. Every time I signed a document as the owner, I felt the old script in my head resisting. "Who do you think you are?" Then I would see Eleanor's neat handwriting on the trust, again hear her voice saying, "You see things clearly and remember." I was not a placeholder daughter. I was not a backup. I was the person she had chosen for a reason. One evening, as the sun went down over the fields and turned everything gold, I parked my car at the edge of the property and walked for a while. The air smelled like cut hay and distant wood smoke. I stopped near the old fence line and said out loud, to no one and everyone, "I will not run this place the way they ran our family. No favoritism, no secrets, no manipulation." The breeze picked up, tugging at my hair. It felt like an answer. Somewhere between those softly spoken vows and the practical work of managing a family business, my revenge shifted shape. It was no longer about watching my parents and sister pay for what they had done. It was about proving that the legacy they tried to control could become something healthier than any of us had known before. Maybe the best payback for a toxic family is not just walking away. Sometimes it is building a better version of what they ruined and refusing to let them touch it. I should have known the peace would not last forever. Toxic patterns rarely die quietly. About 6 months after the trust reveal, I received a thick envelope from a law firm I did not recognize. Inside were neatly typed pages that made my stomach tighten. My parents and sister were contesting the trust. They claimed Eleanor had been unduly influenced by me, that she had not been of sound mind when she signed the documents, that the transfer of her estate to me was contrary to long-standing family expectations. Expectations, not wishes. not instructions, expectations. I took the envelope straight to Mr. Keller. He read the petition slowly, his expression never shifting from quiet focus. They do not have much. He said no medical evidence that your grandmother lacked capacity, no witnesses saying she was confused, only their belief that they deserved what she left you. Will a judge see that? I asked. Or will they just see a family tearing itself apart over money? He looked up at me. A judge will see evidence, and you have it. The weeks before the hearing were some of the longest of my life. I worked. I checked on tenants, I tried to sleep, but underneath everything ran a low hum of dread. This was not just a legal battle. It was a final confrontation with the narrative my parents had built around Brielle and me. On the day of the hearing, I walked into the courthouse in a simple dark dress and low heels. My parents sat on one side of the aisle with Brielle between them, all three in somber colors. Jonah was nowhere to be seen. They did not look at me as I sat on the opposite side with Mr. Keller. The judge, a woman old enough to have heard a lifetime of family drama, took her seat and called the case. My father testified first. He spoke about tradition, about the family business, about how unfair it was to exclude one daughter in favor of another. The word excluded hung in the air. No one mentioned the countless times I had been excluded from decisions, from privileges, from simple affection. Then my mother testified. Her tears were quiet but deliberate. She said she believed I loved Eleanor, but that my grandmother had been confused near the end. When it was Brielle's turn, she leaned hard into the narrative they had built for her entire life. I always assumed I would inherit the properties. She said. I have been managing them for years. Grandma said she wanted me to have a solid future. No one mentioned the missing rent money, the inflated expenses, the secret vacations, billed as inspections. When it was our turn, Mr. Keller called witnesses they had not expected. The notary who had overseen the trust signing. She testified that Eleanor had been sharp, direct, and very clear about her wishes that day. One of the tenants who spoke about how Eleanor had bragged that she was leaving everything to the granddaughter who understands responsibility, not the one who loves attention. Then he called me. I took the stand with my heart pounding but my spine straight. He asked simple questions. How often I had visited Eleanor, what we talked about, whether she had ever seemed confused. Never, I said. If anything, she was more focused at the end. She knew time was short, and she wanted her estate handled by someone who would protect both the assets and the people living on them. Did you ever pressure her to choose you? He asked. No, I said if anything I tried to argue that it would cause a war. She told me she would rather cause a war while she was alive than have her wishes ignored when she was gone. The judge listened carefully, taking notes. When all the testimony was finished, there was a long, heavy pause. Then the judge spoke. Families often confuse entitlement with justice, she said. But the law is clear. A person of sound mind can leave their property to whomever they choose. In this case, the evidence shows that Eleanor knew exactly what she was doing and took steps to ensure those wishes were carried out privately. Perhaps because she anticipated the very conflict we are witnessing today. She looked directly at my parents and sister. The petition to invalidate the trust is denied. The properties remain with the named beneficiary, Ms. Mylisa Rowan. The gavel came down with a sound that felt like the end of an era. As we stood to leave, my mother reached out and clutched at my sleeve. We just wanted what was fair, she whispered. I gently pulled my arm free. Fair would have been treating me like a daughter years ago, I said. This is justice. There is a difference. I walked out of that courtroom into bright afternoon sun blinking at the light, feeling both older and somehow brand new. For the first time in my life, a judge had said out loud what I had always felt but never believed anyone else would see. My story was not a dramatic imagination. It was a documented injustice. And now officially the tables had turned. After the court decision, the noise died down. There were no more legal threats, no more voicemails about judges or penalties or inheritance. My parents retreated into their townhouse. Brielle moved into a small apartment near the edge of the city, somewhere between the life she believed she deserved and the reality she had created. Months passed. Then one rainy evening, someone knocked on my door. I opened it to find Brielle standing there, hair damp, mascara-smudged arms wrapped tightly around herself. For a second, we just stared at each other. Up close, she looked smaller. Not physically, but in the way a person does when the world stops reflecting their favorite version of themselves. Can I come in? She asked. I hesitated. Every old wound screamed no. every part of me that still remembered sharing a bedroom, laughing under covers and holding hands in the dark, when thunderstorms rolled through whispered maybe. I will listen, I said. But we are talking here at the door. Not inside, not yet. She nodded and leaned against the railing. Jonah is engaged, she said without preamble, to someone else. I waited. Our parents are selling more of their things. Dad blames himself. Mom says she does not recognize you anymore. But I think she means she does not recognize herself without the big house and the boats. Her laugh was brittle. I spent my whole life thinking I was the center of the family. Turns out I was just the centerpiece, decorative, replaceable. I did not rush to comfort her. You hurt a lot of people, I said. Not just me, tenants. Our parents, even yourself. She winced. I know the lawyer said if I had just been honest from the start, Grandma might have trusted me too. Instead, I treated the rentals like some endless faucet. I could turn on whenever I wanted. I thought I was clever. Turns out, I was just reckless. Rain dripped from this edge of the roof steady and soft. I came to say I am sorry, she continued. Not for losing the properties, not for the trust. That part is done. I am sorry for how I treated you. For every time I used you as a punchline or dismissed you or let Mom and Dad push you aside because it kept the spotlight on me. I searched her face for manipulation for the old performance. What I saw instead was something uncomfortable and real: shame. I do not expect forgiveness, she said. I just needed you to hear me say it. For a long moment I said nothing. Then I spoke the hardest truth I had. I believe you are sorry, I said. And I appreciate you saying it. But apology does not reset the past. It does not rebuild trust on its own. That takes time. Consistency, boundaries. She nodded, tears mixing with rain on her cheeks. So what now, she whispered. Now I said you go home. You get honest with yourself. You get honest with our parents. You build a life that is not about inheritance or image or favoritism. And maybe someday, we will share more than a conversation on a doorstep. Her lips trembled. Do you still hate me? I shook my head. I am too tired to hate you, Brielle. Hate is heavy. I am putting it down. I am just not picking up responsibility for your healing. That is your work. We stood there for another quiet moment. Two women bound by blood and history and betrayal, and something that might one day become something like peace. Then she turned and walked back down the stairs. Shoulders hunched, hands shoved into the pockets of her coat. I closed the door gently. Inside, the apartment felt different, lighter somehow. Revenge, I realized, had never really been about making them suffer. It had been about forcing the truth into the open and refusing to carry the blame for their choices. What I did with that truth now would define the rest of my story. And maybe that was the most powerful kind of payback of all, not watching them fall, but choosing how I rose. The first Christmas after the court case, the townhouse in Willow Bend stayed dark. No lights twined around the porch railings. No carols floated out into the cold air. No giant tree sat front and center in the picture window. My parents sent one card. Simple, no elaborate family photo. Just a printed message and two signatures that looked tired even in ink. We hope you are well. We are thinking of you. Love, Mom and Dad. I stared at it for a long time before tucking it into a drawer. Then I packed a small bag, loaded my car, and drove to the cabins. The management company had organized a small Christmas Eve gathering for the tenants. Nothing fancy. Hot cocoa store-bought cookies. A secondhand speaker playing soft music. Kids ran around with candy canes. Adults chatted their shoulders loose with the simple relief of having a stable roof over their heads and a landlord who did not treat them like a nuisance. One little girl tugged on my jacket sleeve. Miss Rowan? She said, mispronouncing my last name in a way that made me smile. Did you really used to live in a big mansion? I blinked. Yes, I said slowly, I did. Do you miss it? She asked. I thought of the lake view, the long driveway, the rooms carefully staged for holiday pictures. I thought of the shouting behind closed doors, the favoritism, the manipulation, the way I had felt like a permanent guest in my own life. Sometimes I answered honestly, but I do not miss how it felt to live there. She nodded as if that made perfect sense, then ran off to join the other kids. I stood under a string of cheap lights and watched everyone move through the chilly night air, wrapped in coats and laughter. This, I realized, was the family I had chosen. People bound not by blood, but by shared space. shared vulnerability, shared need. People who did not care how the inheritance had been decided or who had been excluded from some will reading. They cared that the heat worked, that repairs got done, that their rent stayed predictable, and I cared about them. Later, back at my apartment, I sat on the balcony with a mug of tea and looked out at the city lights. I thought about Eleanor, about the way she had seen through the thick fog of favoritism my parents had created, about how she had quietly written a new story with ink and signatures and legal language that would outlast anyone's outrage. I thought about my parents in their townhouse learning how to live without the trappings of wealth, about Brielle starting over in her small apartment, about the quiet possibility that someday we might share a meal that was not poisoned by comparison and entitlement. And I thought about all the women like me sitting in their own small spaces, trying to decide whether the family they were born into was worth the cost of staying. So if you are watching this, and you have ever had to choose between the family that raised you and the peace you built on your own, hear me. You are not selfish for choosing peace. You are not cruel for enforcing boundaries. You are not a villain for refusing to play a rigged game. Sometimes the most radical act of revenge in a family drama is not burning everything down. It is walking away from the toxic table, building your own, and leaving the door unlocked, but firmly closed until people show up willing to sit as equals. My name is Mylisa Rowan. My parents tried to write me out of my own story. My sister tried to treat our grandmother's legacy like a spotlight she could stand under forever. In the end, a quiet woman with clear eyes and a stack of legal documents changed everything. If this story hit something in you, if you have lived your own version of inheritance and betrayal and hidden truth, tell me in the comments what part felt closest to your life. And if you want more stories where karma shows up, the tables turn, and women like us choose dignity over dysfunction, make sure you like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because trust me, in this world of family secrets and buried wills and toxic parents, there is always another story waiting to be told.